steadily it rises. Public preference for Lincoln Continental as the symbol for today's luxury motoring.
Hey, it's Jason ODB, the Lincoln Addict, and I'm going over Barrett Jackson Scottsdale 2023 recap of the Lincoln Continentals, primarily that sold from the 60s models. You guys may recall, if you've watched a couple of these so far, I started at the bottom, so at the $44,000 sale. We're now up to number 3 out of those 11 cars I had originally mentioned. And the next car is a 62 Lincoln Continental Sedan. It sold for $93,500. If you recall, I do cover the price that's listed on Barrett Jackson's site. That does include the buyer's fee, and that's because that's what they provide. That is my source of the data, if you will. Now, you might be thinking, hey, how does this 62 sedan sell for nearly $100,000? And the reason for that is it was tied to President John F. Kennedy and his wife, Jackie. So you'll see here, which we'll look at the Barrett Jackson site in a moment, the car was kept at the Kennedy compound in South Florida. They used to go to church on Sunday mornings, and Jackie used it when she went shopping in Palm Beach. The Lincoln was purchased by Mr. Roart in the summer of 63 before President Kennedy was assassinated in November 63. Roart later donated the car to Elliott Museum of Vehicular Evolution in Stewart. The car remained there until it was purchased by, you can kind of see some of the other information there. The key thing that you want to look at is this car had basically the mileage of 52K, so pretty low. We've seen some cars over the course of time sell, and they had that 50, 60, 70,000 mark. These cars weren't driven like every single day. Typically, they were driven on the weekends and for special occasions and whatnot. Now, let's jump over here and take a look at the actual listing on Barrett Jackson's website. You can see here it sold for $93,500, and let's take a look at some of the photos. Now, because this car was tied to JFK, which he is often referenced when people think of these cars, they think of them as JFK cars. They think of them as quote, the car that Kennedy was in when he got killed. Of course, that was back in 63. He was in a 61 model that had a 62 grille. So anything that's tied to John F. Kennedy from I'd say historical perspective, or even pop culture, so to speak, does tend to elevate the price, and that's exactly what we saw here with this 62. We know it's a 62 by looking at this photo because of the grille. As I've always said, those kind of longer rectangles is kind of really the key giveaway. In 62, they also had the antenna on the back. Of course, in 63, they move it to the front, so that's one of the other kind of telling items there. This is I believe technically it's a Sultan white. We could see it does have air conditioning. And believe it or not, this car does have the 2-port Carter fuel pump. And I often talk about, the importance of having a 3-port, which oftentimes in a write-up is typically referred to as the correct fuel pump. But again, these cars can run on these, but if you ask anyone, as I've said in the past, typically you want to swap this out. We do have the nicer fan shroud, being that it is an AC car. Some of these years were metal. I know, for instance, in 64, I have the metal shroud. I believe 61 through 65 was metal, and I sometimes question myself on that if the early 60s was also metal. But in 67, they kind of went to more of almost like a fiberglass material. And but these are kind of sought after. Especially if you have a non-AC car and you're looking to add AC to it, you want to have that fan shroud there. We can see it has the single reservoir, which I've often talked about on how you would want to swap that out, do some brake work to it. Again, if that goes out while you're driving the car, then you have no brakes, and that's not a good thing. Often haven't talked about a lot of differences. The horns locations, they did move throughout the early 60s. They're in 62. They are up here on this apron on the passenger side. You've got the fuse box over here and a couple of things, the main fuse box. But, some of that stuff we'll talk about in other videos. You can see here the interior is very reminiscent of the 60s. What would be amazing to me owning, if I owned this car, is you think about the just history of it, with Jackie O and JFK sitting in it. Presumably it's the same seats that have never been changed. you'd be insane to start, swapping out the interior or resto modding a car like this. I mean, there's too much history tied to it. And just the fact that JFK rode in this car and it's documented, that tells a lot. And again, I'm a very big fan of, I'll call it like a seafoam type color. I can't rattle this color off the top of my head. You can comment below if you happen to know, but obviously very 60s in terms of the overall feel. We've got a side view of the car, and looks really good. It's got the correct hubcaps. I mean, everything about this car is, kind of original. And we also saw that underneath the hood. So if you were looking for an amazing car to add to your collection that had the JFK lineage, but also was kind of quote unquote original untouched, this would have been the car to purchase. The chrome and bright work looks great overall. I'm sure you could spend some time detailing it if you wanted to. This is kind of cool. Some of the documentation that's going to help, quote, sell this car, 62 Lincoln Continental, and they mentioned this in the write-up in terms of, I think it was Time Magazine maybe, or Life, excuse me, you can see it right here, Life Magazine, and then some of the other documentation. I'll show you a photo here in a moment that my friend Blair had. I don't know if it's an original photo or not, but I'll show it to you in just a minute. Very cool if you had this at an event of any sort. This would be some nice literature to have there. And you can see another kind of page there in the magazine. 52,000. You can see, again, this all looks amazing. This is the way I would want to have a Lincoln, kind of in that original form. We can see, I often talk about here in these little pods, there was like a coating. You can kind of see it here. And a lot of times this looks pretty bad. This one doesn't look bad at all, and I personally wouldn't touch it. But if you have a personal car with one of these gauge clusters, you can get in here with steel wool, the quadruple zero, so 0000, and some Brasso or similar polish. Now, I wouldn't do it while it's in the car, but I've got one of these actually sitting here in my display case next to where I'm recording this. Kind of got some lights in it, and it kind of lights up at night. It was from a parts car, but this oftentimes, if this is scaling real bad, you can see it's doing it here a little bit. You can get in here, again, not on this one, I would say on a personal car, and you can clean all of that almost film off and really polish this up. But again, I wouldn't do anything to that. It's just a comment to add a little bit of insight to what we're looking at. Here's the photo here that they showed a little bit ago, and here's the magazine. Pretty cool stuff. And then some of the literature that goes with it. You can imagine a car of this magnitude, you would want to have some of that. So it was sold on a bonded title is what they mentioned as well. And then they do mention Persian blue. So that's probably the correct color. Now, typically I would start to kind of wrap it up and say, hey, did someone get a good deal on this car? Really, it's whatever someone's willing to pay. We hear that all the time, but I mean, something that is historical like this certainly is kind of a next level, if you will. Now, I do want to add something into it that I said a moment ago, and here's a couple things. So number one, this car did sell just over 10 years ago, so almost 15 years ago, for $71,500, same VIN, and that was at Scottsdale 2009. So if we bounce over here, we'll take a look. Of course, it wants me to log in to see it, which I don't know why it doesn't save in the new tab. But you can see here, it is the same car. They didn't have as many photos then. Things are a little different now with online bidders and stuff. But you can sometimes go back and compare the photos and kind of see, hey, does the interior look any different? It looks like here you can see where someone had just sat in the seat. But, I always kind of like to look, especially if a client's looking for a car, you can kind of look to see, hey, was anything done to said car? You'd imagine on this one, no, it probably just sat in a collection and whatnot. So it is worth noting. It is worth noting that. Now, I did mention the photo. This is from my friend Blair Farmer. I presume that this is a copy of a photo. And when I had originally taken a photo of it, I didn't take the light out. So that just happens to be here. But I do believe this is the car that is referenced in this sale. So in the sale. But you can see here back then they had a plate on it that said Kennedy. That looks like a Colorado plate maybe. But someone was ready to move on. And really, I mean, 22,000 difference over the course of 15 years. I mean, decent little profit, but of course some of that, you have to travel, you have to take the car there and things like that. I would imagine the person that bought it wasn't really looking to cash in, although sometimes they will certainly make a profit there. So what do you guys think of the 62 Lincoln Continental that was tied to JFK and Jackie O? I hope that you guys continue to appreciate what I'm doing here. Really, it's just because I love talking about Lincolns. You can check out Lincoln Addict Podcast however you find podcasts, or on my website, lincolnaddict.podbean.com, I believe it is. You can listen there. You can listen to some of the newer episodes here on YouTube, and check out lincolnaddict.com if you want to buy a shirt or sticker with my logo, Lincoln Addict. I typically ship those within a day or so. Appreciate all the support. We'll continue this series, so make sure you subscribe and stay on the rise. We out of here. Peace.